to Explore Classroom. My name is Jennifer Bergen, and I am so glad you are joining us today. Many of our viewers, like myself, are celebrating Halloween. I hope you all have a wonderful time dressing up if you celebrate, sharing treats with your loved ones. And remember, everyone, stay safe if you go trick-or-treating tonight. Make sure you are with a trusted adult. At National Geographic, we use the power of science, exploration, education, and storytelling to illuminate and protect the wonder of our world. Explore Classroom connects students worldwide with our National Geographic Explorers for a short lesson and time for your questions. Today, our explorer is Meg Lowman. Meg is a conservation ecologist and arbornaut. That means she goes up to the treetops to explore them. Meg is a pioneer in treetop science, and she has created some very special kits to help people fully explore a forest, including putting on a body harness, floating above the canopy in a blimp, and sailing above the treetops to investigate a place we hardly ever get to see. Today, Meg is going to take us on an adventure in the treetops and explain, why does this place matter? Why is it important? And why is it worthy of our curiosity and our protection? But before we get into today's show, I'd like to welcome our registered guests who are joining in from around the globe. Hello to Lancers International School in India, Standout School in Colombia, Sacred Heart in Australia, Kingsdown Learning Adventure in Delaware, Hoffman Boston Elementary School in Virginia. That's my school. And of course, all of our home schools out there. We are so thrilled to have you here. And with that, let's get this Explorer Classroom started. It's time for me to hand it over to Meg, who will share all about discovering the 8th continent. Take it away, Meg.
Hey, thank you so much, Jennifer. I'm just going to see if I can get my screen share to work. Can you all see that? Yay, fantastic. Well, I am excited to be here. I'm not in the treetops, but behind me is the canopy of the Amazon jungle, my favorite place in the world. And on my little head is my Halloween costume this year, which is trying to be a bee. So bees are so important for pollination, for all kinds of wonderful things like honey and keeping so many trees and plants healthy by pollinating their flowers. So lots of insect activity in the treetops. And I'd like to spend the next 10 minutes sharing a little bit of that adventure with you. So 2 questions I hope I'll answer, which are in the title of my talk. What is an arbornaut? And secondly, where is the 8th continent? And you can see me there actually in the same Amazon forest behind my virtual screen, where we have a very cool canopy walkway. Maybe someday you can grow up and train to be a treetop scientist and come with me to this walkway site. So with that, I'm going to switch gears and ask all the kids out there, raise your hand if you ever climbed a tree, not necessarily with a rope, but any kind of climbing. Oh my gosh, look at that. Jennifer's raising her hand, and I see lots of students raising their hands. So most of us, like me in my childhood, did climb a tree, and maybe that's why it's so exciting to be in a tree, and yet it's so strange to realize that very few people have explored the science of the treetops. And this was amazing to me as a student, because when I wanted to study trees as a student in graduate school, nobody was doing it. And I had to actually make a slingshot out of a piece of metal. My mother got nervous. Why a slingshot? She said. Well, I answered, because I need to get the rope up over a branch of the tree. And that's what I use the slingshot for. And that word arbornaut means anybody like me that climbs to study the top of a tree. You've probably heard of astronauts that explore outer space. You've probably heard of aquanauts that go underwater. And believe it or not, we had astronauts and aquanauts long before we had arbornauts. It wasn't until about 30 or 40 years ago that scientists started studying the treetops. And the first method we used was using that little slingshot to put our rope up over a branch. And then I made a harness out of seatbelt webbing and up I went. So that's how we did it. And today, here's one of my students, Anthony, in California. He's 300 feet high in a redwood tree using the ropes and the slingshot in the harness. He's a really, really good aim. He's been able to determine all the mysteries of redwood trees, which is really, really cool. Here's a few of my students doing the same thing in Taiwan, which is a country across the Pacific Ocean from California. And they're so little, the students, I had to circle them so you could see them, almost like ants. And they're climbing the big, beautiful trees of Taiwan to discover the mysteries there. So they're the first arbornauts in Taiwan. So this is happening all over the world, but sometimes it's not easy to use a slingshot or a harness. Maybe we need something different. So in my world, way back when I was a young scientist, I thought to myself, how can I take a whole class of students into the canopy? So I figured out if I built these aerial trails or bridges, we could take 10 people or 20 people at once. We could stay overnight. We could look at all the leaves from the edge. So this is a canopy walkway, we call it, or a skywalk that helps us stay in the canopy. You don't perspire as much as you do climbing a rope. And you can also take a whole group of students at once, which is really, really cool. If you're so lucky, as I have been, to work with some of the international scientists, we have a little operation with inflatable gear. We take about 50 scientists at once to study the very tops of the trees. We can't use our ropes to study the tops because the branches aren't strong enough. We can't even build a canopy walkway at the very top because it can't hold the bridge, but we can float over the top. So here I am in this fabulous hot air balloon. Right there, you can barely see me on this inflatable, we call it a raft. It's got like a trampoline mesh, and lo and behold, you can see me here at night coming up to work on that raft in the dark, which is the beauty of using these inflatables, because guess what? A lot of animals are active at night, and especially insects, because then they avoid the birds eating them. So I'm coming up here, I'm in Africa in this picture, and I'm just about to walk around this and find all the bugs eating the leaves. And I can even put my hand through these cute little Velcro donut spots where I can grab a bug or grab a leaf if I want to. So those are three methods: ropes, walkways, and inflatables. And the fourth method, and the final method that we use a lot, is called a canopy crane. And that's an old construction crane that's been donated by a company, usually in a big city. And with this bucket, of course, we can visit all the leaves around the crane arm. We can work, at the top of the trees. We can count all the iguanas. We can look for sloths. We can measure the leaf damage. We can even measure the photosynthesis if we want to. That's a big word for what the plants are breathing in and out. So those four methods are my toolkit for most of my research. And so what did I discover? This is amazing, but we found out by using these four methods that half of the species on the land portion of our planet live in the top of a tree. And all this was found out in the last 30 years. After scuba gear and after we went to the moon, we started studying the treetops, and lo and behold, we find out that it's this huge treasure of biodiversity, as we call it. Millions of insects and thousands of birds and thousands of animals, and probably all sorts of things we never knew about before. So you have, outside of your school, if you have any trees, you might have new species, because very few people have ever become arbornauts and studied all these cool things like flowers or ants or cool birds like this frigate bird, or even the koala that I discovered and studied its biology in Australia. And this Christmas beetle that was killing all the eucalypt or gum trees in Australia, or this cute little red-eyed tree frog living in Belize. So we now know that probably half of all those species in the canopy are, guess what? Bugs. So that's why I'm a bee for Halloween. That's why I have a spider with me today as my famous and favorite organism, because they eat mosquitoes and do all kinds of cool things. And lo and behold, bugs are really, really important in the canopy. They pollinate things, they make honey, they eat just enough leaf material to make the tree stronger. And once in a while, they eat too much leaf material, but mostly insects are really, really beneficial for us. And also in the treetops, sometimes plants live on the trees. Moss lives on the trees, and lichen lives on the trees, and even thousands of species of orchids like this live in the tops of trees. So it's this very cool community up there. It's kind of like a big condo where at the top, up in the penthouse, all the cool stuff is going on. All the big parties are happening because the pollinators are pollinating all the flowers and the fruits that live at the top. Some things are microscopic. I bet some of you know what this is. Raise your hand if you've ever seen such a crazy microscopic thing. Maybe one or two students, good for you, and Jennifer, of course, but this has to have a microscope to see it, but it's called a water bear. If you've never heard of them before, maybe you can Google them after this class and learn about water bears. They're very, very cute, looking like a little tiny bear. They float in any moisture. They float on leaf surfaces, in tree bark, in moss, and lichens. So guess what? There are millions of them in trees. And I've been studying them because most of them are new species, which is really, really exciting and important. Water bears went to the moon. Water bears went on that Indian space satellite that crashed. And guess what? They got loose. So now we think they might be in outer space somewhere floating around because they're really extreme. If there's a drop of water, that's all they need to live. And guess what? I hate to tell you this, but they live in broccoli, in lettuce, any kind of vegetable that has any moisture probably has water bears on it. So we've probably eaten them, but we never knew it. And maybe they're kind of delicious. Who knows? Other things live in the canopy besides plants and animals and insects and water bears, but some things use the canopy, like this leopard in India, to go and take its breakfast and eat it on a trunk of the tree, because it's a lot easier than eating it on the forest floor where every other animal is trying to poke and take some of its catch. So a lot of animals use the treetops, even if they don't live there. So guess what? All of you can be arbornauts. Here are my two arbornauts, my two boys, Eddie and James. When they were little, because I was a single mom, they had to come to work with me a lot. And so they got little harnesses when they were about 5 and 6 years old. Here are their harnesses that I sewed for them, and they got to explore the treetops with their moms. And I say that because I think kids have better eyes than adults, and you don't need a harness, and you don't need to go very high up a tree and scare your mom and dad. You can just find a branch at the bottom of the forest, and you can look at the leaves when they're in season, or you can look at the bark, and you'll probably find all sorts of very cool things. For a while, I had a 5-year project because I always felt that it's important that everybody can go to the treetops. So these are my fabulous students that maybe couldn't walk like a lot of other students, but they had a lot of curiosity and a lot of interest. So I got some funding to create some pulleys and special things so that they could become arbornauts. And this is Rebecca. Rebecca discovered 3 new species of water bear in the forests of Kansas. She didn't have to go to the Amazon or the middle of the jungle in Malaysia. She just did it right in our own backyard. So there's lots of things to discover. Despite your ability, you too can become an arbornaut. So why are we arbornauts? And what is this 8th continent? Well, The eighth continent really is this huge amount of opportunity to discover things in the tops of trees. We have 7 continents that we can see and step on, but the eighth continent we have to climb to. And the reason we climb to it is that it keeps us alive. It is essential for our health. It freshens our water because it cleans the water through the leaves and the canopy. It provides us with loads of medicines, timber, honey, other kinds of fruits and things that we eat. It serves to save our soil because the tree roots keep the soil from floating downstream into the ocean. Tree trunks store carbon, which is so important because humans unfortunately pollute a lot of carbon dioxide, and the trees recover it for us and take it out of the air. Lots of foods, as I mentioned. Maybe your class can make a list after this talk of what comes from trees. My 2 favorites that I'm going to share are chocolate and mangoes. I love both of those things, and they come from the trees. So there's loads of other things maybe you and your teachers can work on. Lots of building materials, of course, timber and many ropes and thatch roofs in many, many countries. And you know what else? For billions of people, trees are a spiritual place. People worship in the trees. People have their ancestors tied up in legends about the trees. And even for us in North America and Europe and Australia, I heard some people were out there, we love to go to the forest because it makes us healthy. So never underestimate the value of going to a tree and being under it with its shade and its beautiful oxygen and everything else. So I want to just share my last little message is a lot of countries need their trees to be recovered. We have a very difficult situation on planet Earth right now where human beings have cut down a lot of trees by mistake. They don't mean to hurt the children or the grandchildren of the future, but they've cut them down for farming, or they've cut them down for cities or for roads. And in a lot of places, we're cutting down way too many trees. And here's a country I work in very extensively called Ethiopia. It's in Africa, and it's a beautiful country. And the people don't have tractors and they don't have irrigation. So they tend to clear a lot of their forests to plant corn for their children and plant different crops for their families because they don't have modern practices to make the crops produce more. So unfortunately, they don't even have any kind of aerial maps or fencing or measurements. So they've cut 97% of their forests, leaving 3% left. These little tiny green dots are the forests left in Ethiopia, which isn't very much. And here's a close-up of one of those dots. And the reason those trees are left behind is this is the church. So the priest says, you know what, I have to keep the spiritual trees around my church because the people need spiritual trees. And so that's why in Ethiopia, all the churches have trees surrounding them. And this is where all the birds live and all the insects and all the animals and where the water supply exists. But unfortunately, farmers are plowing a little bit. They don't usually have access to an aerial map like this. The cattle and the sheep come in and eat all the seedlings. And so suddenly Ethiopia finds itself in a position where it's just about to lose all of its birds and its animals. And because they're so poor in that country to provide enough resources, we all need to help them. And we need to help every country and every village and every city protect its trees. So I've been working in Ethiopia on a very simple solution. And that is we take the rocks out of the farmer's field, and he's really happy because then he can grow more crops. And we get groups of the church people to make walls. And then inside of the church forest, we save all of the trees and all the medicines and all the water and all of the seedlings and all the birds and animals. So with a very simple solution like that, the children in Ethiopia are so happy because now they have these beautiful forests behind these walls. And like everything, it costs money. You can go on my website. I've had 23 schools last year actually gave their lunch money for a day, and we raised enough to build 2 new walls in 2 new churches. So we're trying to build 40 walls in the best forests in Ethiopia, kind of like a library to save the species. But you don't even have to go as far as Ethiopia. Anywhere you can go to help save trees is so, so important, because the world really needs trees, and everyone from priests like Ethiopia to politicians in America need to help us save our trees because they keep us alive. So my final thought to you today is 3 special activities. Maybe you can do back at home in your school or with your family or your church group, or maybe even your sports group. Try to find the biggest tree near you. That's like finding a huge treasure, because the most species live in it and the most root system exists. And it's like finding a little gold mine. So if you find that biggest tree, maybe you can take its picture and protect it and tell everyone in your town, this is a real treasure and we need to save it. Maybe you can photograph and share trees with your school class so everybody could visit the coolest trees in your town. And third, if you're lucky enough to live near a canopy walkway, because I've been building a lot of them, maybe you can go and see one. There, we have one in Ohio, in Vermont, in Florida, in California, and in Australia, there's quite a few. And so I have a map on my website of all the canopy walkways in the world, and maybe someday you can visit one of those, which would be very, very cool. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, turn it back to Jennifer, and she's in charge of the questions. Thank you so much.
Wow, Meg, thank you so much for such an incredible look into the work that you do. And thank you for that amazing call to action. I hope that many of you out there will consider what Meg asked of us, that we can learn about and notice our own local trees. We can take pictures of trees and notice the differences over time. We can also climb somewhere high. If you don't have a canopy, maybe you can go on an apartment balcony or to the top of your playground and just check out trees more closely. Meg, we've been so lucky to have an expert like you on today's show. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. And I hope someday one of you or 2 of you might become an arbornaut, and I'll get to travel with you and climb trees together.
I know. I want to get in that blimp. Anyone else want to get in that blimp? Yeah, let's be arbornauts. Well, friends, I hope you enjoyed today's show with Meg. It was such a delight to have you. And I hope you join us for our next event for the ages 4 to 8. It's going to be November 7th, and we're going to have National Geographic's very own archaeologist in residence, Fred Hybert. He is so much fun. He's going to teach you about some of the treasures that he has found from ancient Egypt, and you won't want to miss it. So go ahead and register for next week and more. You can find all this at natgeoed.org/Explorer Classroom. Have a great day, everyone. Stay curious, keep exploring, and let's give Meg a big wave and say Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween to you. Thank you.